The Dixie Mafia emerged in the 1960s as a loose network of criminals operating across the Deep South. In Alabama, they gained notoriety in Phoenix City for contract hits, arson for hire, and influence over corrupt officials. Unlike street crews, they were older career criminals who preferred working quietly while using extreme intimidation. Their network later reached Mississippi, where Dixie Mafia figures were convicted in the early 1990s for their role in the 1987 hits on Judge Vincent Sherry and his wife Margaret, proving the group's regional reach. The 1488s is a white supremacist organization that took root inside Alaska's correctional facilities around 2010. The name blends 14, a reference to the so-called 14-word slogan common in extremist circles, with 88, a coded salute to the German dictator. From their base in prisons, they control the smuggling of contraband, using violence to enforce discipline and pressure new white inmates into joining the gang for protection. In 1997, the Hells Angels absorbed Arizona's Dirty Dozen Motorcycle Club, creating one of their strongest U.S. chapters. They became tied to the distribution of hard substances, weapons offenses, and violent conflicts with rivals such as the Mongols. Despite repeated crackdowns, the Hells Angels are still active in Arizona to this day. Their history in the state shows how outlaw motorcycle clubs can shift from local peer groups into powerful multi-state syndicates. The Gangster Disciples expanded into Arkansas in the 1990s through prison networks and urban crews. They operated in Little Rock and other cities, involved in the distribution of illegal substances, armed robberies, and violent enforcement of territory. Federal agents noted how the group recruited young members to maintain control both on the street and inside correctional facilities. In 2011, Operation Delta Blues led to dozens of indictments, exposing the gang's role in statewide narcotics conspiracies. The Mexican Mafia, or La M, began in California's prison system in the 1950s and grew into one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the country. Leaders directed Latino street crews across Southern California, ordering extortion schemes and violent reprisals from inside prison cells. Their influence extended to narcotics networks and the execution of rivals. The gang has a strict code of conduct and even a formal written constitution that outlines their purpose, organizational structure, and rules for membership. Members swear lifetime loyalty. The rule is blood in, blood out. The 211 Crew was created in Colorado prisons during the 1990s as a white supremacist organization. Members used tattoos and coded language to mark affiliation, running extortion rackets and the trade of hard substances inside correctional facilities. Released members extended their activities into Denver and surrounding cities. In 2013, the group drew national attention when a 211 Crew member carried out a fatal ambush on state prison chief Tom Clements, showing how violence planned in prison could reach all the way to state leadership. The Latin Kings spread into Connecticut in the 1980s, establishing strong chapters in Hartford, Bridgeport, and New Haven. Structured under a national hierarchy, they enforced strict codes and used violent enforcement to dominate local narcotics markets. The group has repeatedly been linked to witness intimidation in federal cases. And a 2013 case revealed that Connecticut chapters were still reporting up to national leadership, primarily based in Chicago, highlighting how tightly connected they remained to the broader Latin King structure. The Bloods became active in Wilmington in the 2000s, with 9 Trey and G-Shine factions taking root in public housing projects and schools. Their operations included the distribution of opioids and other illegal substances, along with robberies and gun violence that contributed to high crime levels in the city. Law enforcement reported widespread recruitment of juveniles. Members often identified themselves with red clothing, graffiti tags, and tattoos showing 5-point stars, dog paws, bee symbols, and the words East Coast. Zopound formed in Miami's Little Haiti during the early 1990s, made up largely of Haitian immigrants and their descendants. The name Zo comes from a Creole word meaning bone, symbolizing toughness, hard to the bone. Pound originally stood for Power of Unified Negroes in Divinity. Their combination of ethnic pride, extreme violence through home invasions, and crossover into hip-hop culture makes them one of the most distinctive criminal groups in the USA. The Ghostface Gangsters emerged in Georgia prisons in the 1990s as a white supremacist group. In just 2 decades, they went from a few white inmates to thousands of members, spreading across Georgia prisons and rural communities. Members identify themselves with tattoos of Nazi imagery or their very own ghost skull branding. The gang is known for internal brutality, targeting their own members who break rules with kidnapping and violent assaults. The company was a Hawaiian crime syndicate that rose to power in the 1960s. Built on ties to labor unions, gambling rackets, and political corruption, it became the island's most influential underworld group for 2 decades. Unlike most of the gangs on this list, this one was composed of a racially diverse membership, including Japanese, Hawaiian, Filipino, and Chinese members, reflecting Hawaii's demographics. The company used bribes and intimidation to silence opposition, giving them power over both working-class communities and the elite. As if the name didn't make it clear, the Aryan Knights are a white supremacist organization. They were founded in the 1990s inside Idaho's prison system, where new white inmates are pressured into joining for protection. Members often mark themselves with tattoos featuring AK, swastikas, or lightning bolts, which are widely used to show allegiance to the gang, making them practically mandatory for full-fledged members. The gang enforces a strict code of loyalty. Disobedience leads to violent discipline, often carried out in the open to send a message. The Chicago Outfit is one of the most infamous crime syndicates in U.S. history, emerging during Prohibition under Al Capone. It controlled bootlegging, gambling, labor unions, and city politics through bribery and intimidation. The group later extended influence into Las Vegas casinos, while maintaining power in Chicago for decades. They were perhaps most renowned for the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929, where Capone's men executed 7 rivals, solidifying the outfit's violent reputation. In Indiana, the Sons of Silence Motorcycle Club members wear a patch showing an American eagle superimposed over the letter A. Motorcycle shops and bars in Indiana often serve as fronts, while leaders maintained close ties to allied groups like the Hells Angels. Federal officials have repeatedly described the Sons of Silence as one of the most dangerous biker clubs in the Midwest. In 1999, a sweeping ATF and FBI operation indicted over 30 members on narcotics and weapons charges. Like Arkansas mentioned previously, the Gangster Disciples are also Iowa's most notorious gang, brought into the state during the 1980s and 1990s through migration from Chicago and narcotics pipelines along Interstate 80. Members use the group's familiar symbols, blue and black clothing, 6-point stars, and pitchfork tattoos. What makes the GDs stand out in Iowa is not their size, but their influence. In a state where organized gang activity has often been limited, the Gangster Disciples are the most notorious, directly linking Iowa's crime landscape to Chicago's networks. In Kansas, the Sureños dominate both prisons and the streets, and what sets them apart is their fragmentation into different subsets. Police have documented cliques such as the Southside Locos and Sur 13, each tied back to the larger Sureño network. Members identify with the color blue, the number 13, and graffiti tags that often appear across Wichita neighborhoods. Their influence has not gone uncontested. Sureños in Kansas have battled the Norteño rivals, as well as with Bloods and Crips transplanted from other states. Welcome to Kentucky, home of the Cornbread Mafia. Centered in rural counties, the group operated in the 1970s and 1980s as a loose network of local farmers and associates who turned Kentucky farmland into a nationwide supply chain for weed. Federal investigators later described it as the largest domestic cannabis syndicate in U.S. history. At its peak, the Cornbread Mafia coordinated more than 70 farms across multiple states, with central Kentucky as the hub. Unlike urban gangs, its members relied on agricultural know-how, back roads, and rural isolation to grow and move product largely undetected. MS-13 began in Los Angeles, but established a presence in Louisiana through immigrant communities and correctional facilities. After Hurricane Katrina in 2005, the city's upheaval created gaps in law enforcement and new opportunities for organized gangs, including MS-13. Members were tied to violent assaults, extortion, and the trade of illegal substances in and around New Orleans. Federal reports tie MS-13 in Louisiana to machete attacks and extreme intimidation tactics, the same hallmarks that made them infamous elsewhere. The Brady Gang operated during the 1930s as one of New England's most violent criminal outfits. Led by Al Brady, the group carried out armed robberies and assaults across the region while traveling heavily armed. Their reign ended in 1937 during a shootout in downtown Bangor, when FBI agents confronted the gang in a crowded street. Brady himself and one of his men did not survive the confrontation, and one FBI agent was wounded. It was Maine's most infamous criminal incident of the era. The Black Guerrilla family expanded into Baltimore in the 1990s, becoming one of the state's most organized prison gangs. Members ran narcotics operations both inside and outside facilities, while using violence to enforce discipline. In 2013, federal prosecutors revealed that BGF leader Tavon White had impregnated 4 female prison guards who helped smuggle in contraband and protect members. The scandal exposed deep corruption in Maryland's correctional system and showed how powerful the group had become behind bars. The Winter Hill Gang rose out of Somerville in the 1960s as an Irish-American crew involved in gambling, loan sharking, and contract hits. Its most infamous member, Whitey Bulger, ran the organization through the 1970s and 80s, while secretly serving as an FBI informant. Bulger used his position to eliminate rivals and expand Winter Hill's influence across Boston. His eventual arrest in 2011 and conviction for racketeering confirmed the gang's role in shaping the criminal underworld in Massachusetts. The Highwaymen Motorcycle Club was founded in Detroit in the 1950s and grew into the city's most notorious biker gang. They became known for trafficking narcotics, orchestrating assaults, and violent rivalries with other motorcycle clubs such as the Outlaws and Hells Angels. Their reputation for violence was so extreme that it isolated them from key alliances that most outlaw motorcycle gangs relied on, making them both independent and feared. The Native Mob is one of the very few gangs in the U.S. with a Native American cultural base. It began in the 1990s among indigenous communities in Minnesota and quickly became a dominant gang on reservations and in prisons. Their recruitment of new members is focused heavily on youth in tribal communities and correctional facilities. Federal prosecutors identified the group as responsible for numerous armed assaults and retaliations across the upper Midwest. Their dual presence in big cities and rural tribal lands makes them hard to eradicate. The Simon City Royals originated in Chicago, but became Mississippi's largest prison-based gang. By the 2000s, they had spread into cities, such as Jackson and Gulfport, through their heavy presence in correctional facilities. Their prison power is so strong it allows them to tax smaller groups. The group engages in narcotics trafficking, armed assaults, and violent feuds with rivals like the Vice Lords and Latin Kings. Authorities estimate that the Royals have over 1,000 members in Mississippi, many inside prisons. The Vice Lords expanded into Missouri through St. Louis and Kansas City after their initial founding in Chicago in the 1950s. They became heavily involved in narcotic sales, extortion, and violent disputes with rival groups, especially the Gangster Disciples and Bloods. Federal agents have documented the gang's organized structure, with local sets reporting up to Chicago leadership. Their Chicago roots gave them structure and symbolism that stood out compared to more local, loosely organized groups. The Aryan Brotherhood has maintained influence in Montana's correctional system since the 1980s. Members are identified by white supremacist tattoos and symbols, enforcing discipline through intimidation and violent assaults. Leaders are known to use coded notes and visitors to run operations from inside prison, mirroring the group's national structure. Witnesses even testified to federal prosecutors about intimidation campaigns and taxing systems that targeted other inmates. The Crips didn't start out in Nebraska. They expanded to Omaha from Los Angeles during the 1980s crack epidemic, participating heavily in its facilitation and distribution. Their presence fueled violent conflicts across the city's north side, particularly with the Omaha Bloods, who also moved over from LA at about the same time. The gang's activities are primarily focused in predominantly black neighborhoods of North Omaha. In fact, in multiple years, a significant portion of the city's homicides were linked to Crip activity. Organized crime in Nevada is synonymous with the Las Vegas mob, a network tied to the Chicago outfit that expanded into casinos in the 1940s. Figures like Bugsy Siegel and Tony Spilatro's Hole-in-the-Wall gang became infamous for violence and casino skimming operations that siphoned millions. Unlike street gangs, this was a multi-family mafia enterprise with direct ties to unions, casinos, and politics. Las Vegas is one of the few U.S. cities where the mob essentially built the economy. The Hells Angels established a chapter in New Hampshire that became the state's most visible outlaw biker gang. Members engaged in narcotic sales, assaults, and turf disputes, with rivals such as the Outlaws Motorcycle Club. In 2009, a statewide raid seized weapons, cash, and illegal substances, disturbing their operations. Despite the crackdown, the Angels maintained a presence in the state, with law enforcement continuing to monitor their activities closely. The Nine Trey faction of the Bloods became New Jersey's most notorious gang, centered in Newark and surrounding cities. The gang recruits aggressively in prisons and targets young people in urban neighborhoods. Their structure includes generals and soldiers, showing a hierarchical setup unusual for many street gangs. But don't let that fool you. They are known for violent enforcement and narcotics trafficking, and gained national attention in 2019 during the federal trial of rapper Tekashi 6ix9ine, who testified against Nine Trey members, revealing details of shootings and extortion schemes. The Sindicato de Nuevo Mexico formed inside the state's prison system in the 1980s after the infamous Santa Fe prison riot. It became a structured prison gang known for ordering assaults and directing the illegal substance trade both behind bars and on the streets. Authorities have tied the group to contract hits, kidnapping, and intimidation campaigns. Federal indictments in 2015 charged dozens of members with racketeering, confirming the gang's ongoing influence over New Mexico's correctional system. The Gambino crime family is one of New York's 5 mafia families, and among the most infamous criminal organizations in U.S. history. With roots going back to the early 1900s Sicilian-American mafia networks, it was built by Carlo Gambino and later made infamous by John Gotti. The family controlled racketeering, construction contracts, and violent reprisals across the city. At its peak, there were an estimated 150 to 250 made members and thousands of associates. In 1992, Gotti was convicted on racketeering and slaying charges, cementing the family's reputation. The United Blood Nations was founded in Rikers Island Prison during the 1990s. and quickly spread into North Carolina, becoming the state's most feared prison-based gang. Known for coordinating attacks ordered from prisons, often by generals giving orders through contraband cell phones, UBN members dominated substance distribution networks in Charlotte and Raleigh, all while using violence to control recruits. In 2017, federal prosecutors charged nearly 100 members with armed robberies, gun violence, and organized extortion. The Sureños expanded into North Dakota during the early 2010s. Drawn by the Bakken oil boom, members operated narco networks, using intimidation to enforce rules in towns near drilling sites. Local law enforcement reported increased gang violence in communities unaccustomed to organized crime. Multi-state investigations linked North Dakota Sureños to cells in California and Texas, showing how the oil boom created openings for national gangs to establish a presence in the northern plains. The Heartless Felons formed in Ohio's juvenile detention centers in the early 2000s and grew into the state's most violent prison gang. Members have been tied to robberies, carjackings, and armed assaults across Cleveland. Their activity later spread into Columbus, Akron, and Dayton, making them a statewide presence. The group maintained a structural hierarchy, extending its influence into adult prisons. The Heartless Felons are Ohio's largest homegrown gang, not imported from outside. The Universal Aryan Brotherhood originated in Oklahoma's prison system as a white supremacist group. Unlike national gangs, UAB is homegrown and Oklahoma-specific, rooted entirely in the state's prison system, not an offshoot from California or Texas. Today, it stands as the most entrenched and feared gang in the state, blending extremist ideology with organized crime. Membership is marked by tattoos featuring UAB, swastikas, and runes, with allegiance enforced by a blood oath. Once initiated, members are bound for life. The Gypsy Joker Motorcycle Club began in Portland during the 1950s and grew into a national outlaw biker gang. In Oregon, they became known for substance trafficking, extortion, and violent feuds with rivals, including the Hells Angels. Their reputation worsened in 2015 when a former member was abducted, then brutally and fatally attacked in a case that led to multiple federal indictments. The gang is viewed by law enforcement as one of the most violent outlaw motorcycle gangs in the Pacific Northwest. Pennsylvania's most notorious criminal network is the Philadelphia Mafia, led at different times by Angelo Bruno and Nicky Scarfo. Bruno ruled with relative calm until his fatal ambush in 1980, after which Scarfo's violent reign plunged the organization into bloody disputes. The family's operations included extortion, loan sharking, and narcotics distribution. Federal crackdowns in the 1980s and 1990s dismantled much of its leadership, but later figures, like Joey Merlino, kept the family in headlines into the 2000s, showing its resilience despite decades of indictments. The Patriarca crime family has dominated organized crime in Rhode Island since the mid-20th century. Founded by Raymond Patriarca Sr., the family ran gambling, loan sharking, and extortion rackets across New England. Federal investigations in the 1980s and 1990s exposed high-ranking Patriarca leaders and brought major convictions. Even after prosecutions weakened its structure, the family's name remains synonymous with Rhode Island organized crime, linking the state to the broader history of the American Mafia. The Gangster's Disciples are not local to South Carolina, but have become the most organized and perhaps most feared gang in the state's prisons, making them more influential than the Bloods or Crips there. The Gangster Disciples expanded into South Carolina through prisons and urban neighborhoods in Columbia, Charleston, and Greenville in the 1990s. Law enforcement has described their recruitment as focused on younger members, often linked to schools and housing projects. Their activities are not unique: narcotics trafficking, armed assaults, and violent disputes with rivals. The native mob isn't native to South Dakota. They formed in Minneapolis before spreading into reservations and prison systems across Minnesota, Wisconsin, North Dakota, and South Dakota. Estimated to have 200 to 300 members across the region, they often use native imagery in tattoos or graffiti, alongside gang symbols. Recruiting is primarily focused on young men in tribal communities and correctional systems. The gang thrives on jurisdictional gaps between tribal, state, and federal law enforcement, making it harder to prosecute their crimes effectively. The Vice Lords, one of the oldest Chicago gangs, spread into Memphis during the 1960s and grew into one of Tennessee's most notorious groups by the 1980s and 1990s. They organized substance trafficking networks while engaging in violent feuds with rivals, particularly the Gangster Disciples. Law enforcement describes their structure as highly organized, with sets reporting up to national leadership. In the 2010s, federal RICO indictments charged Tennessee vice lords with racketeering, intimidation, and narcotics conspiracies, showing their long-standing grip on Memphis neighborhoods. The Texas Syndicate originated in California prisons, but became one of Texas's largest Hispanic prison gangs by the 1980s. Members controlled narcotic trafficking inside correctional facilities and extended operations into cities such as Houston and Dallas. They have been frequently at odds with rival groups, including the Mexican Mafia and Barrio Azteca. The Texas Syndicate is considered the oldest and most disciplined prison gang in Texas, giving it historical weight. Their name makes it clear. The Soldiers of Aryan Culture are a white supremacist gang. They're based in Utah prisons, where they formed during the 1990s. Utah doesn't have the large inmate populations of, say, Texas or California, yet SAC became the largest prison gang in Utah, showing how fast they recruited and dominated in a smaller system. The gang has its own written rules and chain of command, modeled on the Aryan Brotherhood, but adapted for Utah's system. They require members to put in work immediately, assaults or extortion, to earn their patch. The Bloods established a surprising presence in small Vermont cities such as Rutland and Bear. Unlike major metropolitan chapters, Vermont factions were involved mainly in narcotics distribution and intimidation tied to local housing projects. Their recruitment of juveniles drew attention in a state unaccustomed to gang activity. Multiple narco busts in the 2010s charged members with trafficking opioids and other substances, with supply lines pumping New York crime into small, rural communities in Vermont. MS-13 became notorious in Northern Virginia during the 1990s, establishing one of the gang's most significant U.S. footholds. Members engaged in extortion, armed assaults, and retaliatory attacks closely linked to immigrant neighborhoods. Law enforcement connected the group to school recruitment and cross-border narco networks. In 2017, a Fairfax County case made national headlines when several members lured a teenager into the woods and fatally attacked him, showing just how brutal this gang can be. Authorities continue to describe Northern Virginia as one of the gang's most entrenched American strongholds. No, not a boy band. Down with the Crew, or DWC, is a Seattle-based Asian American gang that rose to prominence in the 1990s. Known for clashes with rival groups like the Asian Boys, DWC includes primarily Southeast Asian youth, Cambodian, Vietnamese, and Laotian. Known for graffiti tags, DWC, and gang colors that vary by set, they are not as large as national gangs, but tightly organized within Seattle's Asian community, and tightly rooted in the refugee experience. The Pagans Motorcycle Club became active in West Virginia as part of their Appalachian stronghold. Founded in the late 1950s, the Pagans grew into one of the nation's most violent outlaw biker clubs. They are deeply tied to Appalachia's biker culture, giving them a regional identity stronger than many national gangs. Their visibility at biker rallies and events makes them unusually public compared to other organized crime groups in the state. The Gangster Disciples spread into Milwaukee during the 1980s, taking control of the city's crack trade and fueling turf disputes. As with other groups we've seen on this list, members recruited heavily among juveniles and extended influence into Wisconsin's prisons. The Gangsters' Disciples' ability to replicate Chicago's gang structure across state lines has made them the most entrenched gang in Wisconsin, with Milwaukee at the heart of their regional power. The Aryan Brotherhood's influence far outweighs its relatively small numbers. In a state with fewer inmates and fewer competing gangs, since the 90s, the AB quickly became the most dominant prison organization in Wyoming. Membership is reserved for white inmates and marked by tattoos such as shamrocks, swastikas, and the letters AB. Their extremist ideology, combined with their control of narcotics inside correctional facilities, makes them the state's most notorious and entrenched gang. Well, that certainly was a diverse grouping, to say the least. From the biker gangs in Arizona to the Latin Kings in Connecticut and Italian Mafia in Chicago and New York. I guess there's something for everyone, if that's your thing. God bless America. Unfortunately for many of these states, determining the most notorious gang was tough because of the many other contenders and violent groups. Ultimately, deciding the winner for each state was set by weighing factors of infamy and recognition, scale of activity, level of violence, historical significance, and current activity, as well as uniqueness to the state. That being said, how'd we do? We'd love to hear from you. Let us know in the comments. And if you're still around, please leave a like. It really helps the channel. And subscribe to see more videos like this from us in the future. In fact, there should be another video on your screen right now that YouTube thinks you might like, so please check it out. Thanks for watching. See you next time.